Hello, and welcome to the Seafood Slavery Risk Tool website. I may refer to it as SSRT, as you see here, the risk tool, or just the tool. We're currently revising the risk tool, so the purpose of this webinar is to review where we've been and where we're headed. First, I'd like to briefly describe who we are. The risk tool was created by the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch Program, the Sustainable Fisheries Partnership, or SFP, and Liberty Shared. Both Seafood Watch and SFP are environmental sustainable seafood ratings programs. They work with consumers and businesses to help inform them about environmentally sustainable seafood purchasing decisions. Liberty Shared collects information and creates intelligence on wildlife and human trafficking and other illicit activities to provide to the financial business sector. Together, we have formed a new U.S. nonprofit organization called SSRT Inc., which houses and runs the Seafood Slavery Risk Tool. As you may recall, in 2015, there were several investigative journalism pieces describing slavery in the Thai fishing fleet. In response, the business partners of both Seafood Watch and SFP asked each organization for help as to how to begin identifying the risk of forced labor and human trafficking in their own supply chains. The risk tool, therefore, was created as a starting point for businesses to assist them in honing in on the riskiest parts of their supply chains when they are conducting their due diligence. This includes any businesses with a financial interest in the seafood industry. The risk tool also can be a starting point for other actors, including chefs, law enforcement, students, and consumers. This chart summarizes the elements included in the prototype risk tool version 1.0. We decided to have our expert analysts focus only on the catching sector of fishing as a first step. The prototype arrived at a risk rating using publicly available information that was run through a complex decision tree. The prototype website was launched in February 2018 and includes 35 in-depth risk profiles of fisheries and their associated ratings. The draft risk tool went through 4 rounds of external review by business partners and experts in labor rights in seafood and other industries. We have formed partnerships to share information and intelligence with the University of California, Santa Barbara and Global Fishing Watch. 6 months after the launch of the tool, the partnership met in person and invited a few external experts to review the tool. The overwhelming greatest value of the tool, described by those experts, was the in-depth synthesis of publicly available information conducted by our expert analysts. During this meeting, we took a hard look at what was working and what wasn't, and decided to make some changes. We identified some challenges, including the fact that it is very difficult to find evidence of forced labor, human trafficking, or hazardous child labor at the fisheries level, so we relied on the decision tree, which used information at the country level to rate the fishery. This resulted in many high-risk ratings and pushback from governments and industry. We realized we needed to address the challenge of this lack of information in a different way. This shows our conceptual model of how we view risk of forced labor, human trafficking, and hazardous child labor in the seafood industry. There is systemic risk in the seafood industry as a whole because fishing and aquaculture often occur in remote areas that are difficult to monitor and frequently employ vulnerable populations. There are certain seafood systems that are riskier than others, and we want to help our business partners in the seafood and financial industries identify where they should first conduct their due diligence by shining a spotlight on the riskiest systems and parts of a supply chain. Also, we recognize that an absence of evidence is inherently risky. This table shows the changes we are making to the risk tool. In version 2.0, we will be looking at fisheries, aquaculture, and seafood processing. We are maintaining our evidence-based approach, but we are eliminating a risk rating and the decision tree. By eliminating the risk rating, we can focus on the relative risk, identifying the riskiest products and riskiest parts of a seafood system. This also allows us to use indicators to help identify risk. Because relationships between indicators of risk and actual forced labor, human trafficking, and hazardous child labor have not been quantified, we were unable to use indicators in the prototype version of the tool. For example, does a certain indicator increase risk by 50%, by 10%, by 90%? We just don't know. What we do know is that there are variables that can increase risk of labor abuse in seafood. We will maintain focus on country-level legislation and enforcement, but this time as indicators or drivers of risk rather than as a risk rating. Again, an absence of evidence will be considered inherently risky. All indicators were identified in the peer-reviewed literature and are based on publicly available evidence. We have created 3 levels of indicators: country level, seafood industry level, and specific indicators for processing, fishing, and aquaculture. We also have identified 2 types of indicators: causal indicators, such as those that create or increase an environment conducive to forced labor, human trafficking, and hazardous child labor, and those that are correlated with labor abuses. So far, we have created a way of prioritizing which seafood systems we plan to assess. This prioritization process first involves looking at global seafood trade data, focusing on those products imported into the EU and US markets. We then identify those products where those products are processed to expand the scope and look at a couple of indicators to hone in on which countries we should most closely examine. We've finalized our literature review and created our list of indicators at each level and created a document detailing this methodology. We are currently piloting wild-caught tropical tunas through this new methodology. After we complete the pilot testing, we will solicit external expert peer review of the new methodology and pilot test, incorporate improvements, and launch version 2.0. The new website likely will include heat maps similar to this one showing illegal, unreported, and unregulated or IUU fishing in the tropical tuna pilot test. We thank you for listening to this webinar. Do not hesitate to contact us at this email address, contact@seafoodslaveryrisk.org. We thank you for your attention and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.